Michael wanted to do this sitting down, but it's the old demagogue in me. I need the pulpit, I need the podium, and if I can't be erect, at least I can be upright. By the way, do you know why the Amish girl was excommunicated? Too Mennonite. Look, I'm going to take the doctor's excellent points in order, if I may, and you will, I'm sure, have minds orderly enough to recall the order in which he made them. On the empirical evidence, so-called, adduced, that a religious faith can lead to greater health and well-being, I, in a sense, do not doubt it. In other words, I can easily imagine that those who think they are the special object of a divine design feel better for thinking so. I just think it's going to be very important for anyone claiming this to see the dismaying trapdoor that is right under their feet. If you're going to claim this for one, how are you not going to claim it for all? Do we not hear incessantly that the Hamas organization in Gaza is a provider of welfare to the poorest of the poor? Have we not heard this? Do we not hear that Louis Farrakhan's crackpot racist organization, the Nation of Islam, gets young people off drugs? For all I know, it's true. It not only says nothing about the truth or validity of their theology, but it must say a certain amount, at least, about our willingness to think wishfully or cultishly, which was, if you like, part of my point to begin with. Not imposed? Did you really say not imposed? What if you reject this offer? What have you been told for centuries by Christians? If you reject this offer that took place by means of a torture to death of a human being that you didn't want and should have prevented, if you could. What if you reject the offer? If you accept it, you can have eternal life and your sins are forgiven. Oh, great. What a horrible way to abolish your own responsibility and get your own bliss. I don't want it. Oh, you don't? Well, then you can go to hell. This is not imposed. This hasn't been preached to children by gruesome elderly virgins backed by force for centuries. This hasn't poisoned whole societies? No. Of course it's not voluntary. The Pope of Rome, as I call the Bishop of Rome, Mr. Ratzinger, has recently said, actually, it's worse than that. Only my version of Christianity can get you salvation. And there is only one way. I say it in Georgetown. There's only one. You presumably don't believe that because you're an Anglican. But on what basis do you tell the Pope that he's a heretic? Once you grant this stuff, once you start with this white noise chat about redemption, where is it going to end? Of course there's nothing voluntary about it. And I must say the book of Revelation seems one of the less voluntary texts of the... all it does is look forward gleefully to apocalypse, to the passing away of this veil of tears into our ultimate destruction. This is morality? I don't think so. Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea. Greedy, exigent, I would say more than exigent, greedy for uncritical praise from dawn till dusk, and swift to punish the original sins with which it so tenderly gifted us in the very first place. However, let no one say there's no cure. Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you when you consider your voting, is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? to our terror of death? Is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good for the world? And asking yourself the while, are these really religious responsibilities, as I maintain they are? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? To insist that we are created and not evolved in the face of all the evidence. To say that certain books of legend and myth, man-made and primitive, are revealed, not man-made code. Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is, as the great physicist Steven Weinberger has very aptly put it, in the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can. But if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion. Now, I've got now 1 minute and 57 seconds to say why I think this is very self-evident in our material world. Let me ask Tony again, because he's here, and because the place where he is seeking peace is the birthplace of monotheism. So you might think it was unusually filled with refulgence and love and peace. Everyone in the civilized world has roughly agreed, including the majority of Arabs and Jews and the international community, that there should be enough room for 2 states for 2 peoples in the same land. I think we have a rough agreement on that. Why can't we get it? The UN can't get it, the US can't get it, the Quartet can't get it, the PLO can't get it, the Israeli parliament can't get it. Why can't they get it? Because the parties of God have a veto on it, and everybody knows that this is true. Because of the divine promises made about this territory, there will never be peace, there will never be compromise. There will instead be misery, shame, and tyranny, and people will kill each other's children for ancient books and caves and relics. And who is going to say that this is good for the world? And that's just the example nearest to hand. Have you looked lately at the possibility that we used to discuss as children in fear? What will happen when messianic fanatics get hold of an apocalyptic weapon? Well, we're about to find that out as we watch the Islamic Republic of Iran and its party of God allies make a dress rehearsal for precisely this. Have you looked lately at the revival of Tsarism in Putin's Russia, where the black-cowled, black-coated leadership of Russian Orthodoxy is draped over an increasingly xenophobic, tyrannical, expansionist, and aggressive regime? Have you looked lately at the teaching in Africa and the consequences of it, of a church that says AIDS may be wicked, but not as wicked as condoms? That's exactly no seconds left, ladies and gentlemen. I've done my best. Believe me, I have more. Is it moral to believe that your sins, yours and mine, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, can be forgiven by the punishment of another person? Is it ethical to believe that? I would submit that the doctrine of vicarious redemption by human sacrifice is utterly immoral. I might, if I wished, if I knew any of you, or you were my friends, or even if I didn't know you, but I just loved the idea of you. Compulsory love is another sickly element of Christianity, by the way. But suppose I could say, look, you're in debt, I've just made a lot of money out of a God-bashing book. I'll pay your debts for you. Maybe you'll pay me back someday, but for now I can get you out of trouble. I could say, if I really loved someone who'd been sentenced to prison, if I could find a way of saying I'd serve your sentence, I'd try and do it. I could do what Sidney Carton does in A Tale of Two Cities. If you like, I'm very unlikely to do this unless you've been incredibly sweet to me. I'll take your place on the scaffold. But I can't take away your responsibilities. I can't forgive what you did. I can't say you didn't do it. I can't make you washed clean. The name for that in primitive Middle Eastern society was scapegoating. You pile the sins of the tribe on a goat, you drive that goat into the desert to die of thirst and hunger, and you think you've taken away the sins of the tribe. a positively immoral doctrine that abolishes the concept of personal responsibility on which all ethics and all morality must depend. It has a further implication. I'm told that I have to have a share in this human sacrifice, even though it took place long before I was born. I had no say in it happening. I wasn't consulted about it. Had I been present, I would have been bound to do my best to stop the public torture and execution of an eccentric preacher. I would do the same even now. No, I'm implicated in it. I myself drove in the nails. I was present at Calvary. It confirms the original filthy sin in which I was conceived and born, the sin of Adam in Genesis. Again, this may sound a mad belief, but it is the Christian belief. Well, it's here that we find something very sinister about monotheism and about religious practice in general. It is incipiently, at least, and I think often explicitly, totalitarian. I have no say in this. I am born under a celestial dictatorship which I could not have had any hand in choosing. I don't put myself under its government. I am told that it can watch me while I sleep. I'm told that it can convict me of, here's the definition of totalitarianism, thought crime. For what I think, I may be convicted and condemned. And that if I commit a right action, it's only to evade this punishment. And if I commit a wrong action, I'm going to be caught up not just with punishment in life for what I've done, which often follows axiomatically, but even after I'm dead. In the Old Testament, gruesome as it is, recommending as it is of genocide, racism, tribalism, slavery, genital mutilation, the displacement and destruction of others, terrible as the Old Testament gods are, they don't promise to punish the dead. There's no talk of torturing you after the earth has closed over the Amalekites. Only till when gentle Jesus, meek and mild, makes his appearance, are those who won't accept the message told they must depart into everlasting fire. Is this morality? Is this ethics? I submit, not only is it not only does it come with the false promise of vicarious redemption, but it is the origin of the totalitarian principle which has been such a burden and shame to our species for so long. All I'm arguing is that it would be better if there was a great deal more by way of an outbreak of secularism. Logically, if Tony's right, I would be slightly better off, not much, but slightly better off, being a Wahhabi Muslim, or a 12 Shia Muslim, or a Jehovah's Witness, than I am wallowing as I do in mere secularism. What I'm arguing, and really seriously, is what we need is a great deal more of one and a great deal less of the second. And I knew it would come up, that we'd be told about charity. And I take this very seriously. Because we know, ladies and gentlemen, as it happens, we're the first generation of people who do really, what the cure for poverty really is. It eluded people for a long, long time. The cure for poverty has a name, in fact. It's called the empowerment of women. If you give women some control over the rate at which they reproduce, if you give them some say, take them off the animal cycle of reproduction to which nature and some doctrine, religious doctrine, condemns them, and then if you'll throw in a handful of seeds perhaps and some credit, the floor of everything in that village, not just poverty, but education, health and optimism will increase. It doesn't matter, try it in Bangladesh, try it in Bolivia, it works all the time. Name me one religion that stands for that, or ever has. Wherever you look in the world and you try to remove the shackles of ignorance and disease and stupidity from women, it is invariably the clerisy that stands in the way. Or in the case of Now, furthermore, if you're going to grant this to Catholic charities, say, which I would hope are doing a lot of work in Africa, if I was a member of a church that had preached that AIDS was not as bad as condoms, I'd be putting some conscience money into Africa too, I must say. But it won't bring, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be funny. If I was trying to be funny, you mistook me. It won't bring back the millions of people who've died wretched deaths because of that teaching. That still goes on. I'd like to hear a word of apology from the religious about that, if it was on offer. After all, otherwise I'd be accused of judging them by the worst of them. And this isn't done, as Tony says so wrongly, in the name of religion. It's a direct precept practice an enforceable discipline of religion. Is it? Not so, in this case. I think you'll find that it is. But if you're going to say, all right, the Mormons will tell you the same. You may think it's a bit cracked to think that Joseph Smith found another Bible buried in upstate New York, but you should see our missionaries in action. I'm not impressed. I'd rather have no Mormons and no missionaries, quite honestly, and no Joseph Smith. Do we grant to Hamas and to Hezbollah, both of whom will tell you and incessantly do, look at our charitable work. Without us, Effendi, the poor of Gaza, the poor of Lebanon, where would they be but for our... And they're right. They do a great deal of charitable work. It's nothing compared to the harm that they do, but it's a great deal of work all the same. I'm also familiar with the teachings of the great Rabbi Hillel. I even know where he plagiarized the story from, if he had access to the stuff. The injunction not to do to another what would be repulsive if done to yourself is found in the Analects of Confucius, if you want to date it. But actually it's found in the heart of every person in this room. Everybody knows that much. We don't require divine permission to know right from wrong. We don't need tablets administered to us 10 at a time in tablet form on pain of death to be able to have a moral argument. No, we have the reasoning and the moral suasion of Socrates and of our own abilities. We don't need dictatorship to give us right from wrong, and that's my lot. Thank you. What is it like? I've never tried it. I've never been a cleric. What is it like to lie to children for a living and tell them that they have an authority that they must love, compulsory love, what a grotesque idea, and be terrified of at the same time? What's that like, I want to know? And that we don't have an innate sense of right and wrong. The children don't have an innate sense of fairness and decency, which of course they do. What is it like? I can personalize it to this extent. My mother's Jewish ancestors are told that until they got to Sinai, they'd been dragging themselves around the desert under the impression that adultery, murder, theft, and perjury were all fine. They get to Mount Sinai only to be told it's not kosher after all. I'm sorry. Excuse me. We must have more self-respect than that for us, for ourselves and for others. Of course, the story's a fiction. It's a fabrication exposed conclusively by Israeli archaeology. Nothing of the sort ever took place, but suppose we take the metaphor. It's an insult. It's an insult to us. It's an insult to our deepest integrity. No, if we'd believed that perjury, murder, and theft were all right, we wouldn't have got as far as the foot of Mount Sinai or anywhere else. And because I'd never like to miss out a chance to congratulate someone on being humorous, if only unintentionally, it's very touching for Tony to say that he recently went to a meeting that bridged a religious divide in Northern Ireland. Well, where does the religious divide come from? 400 years and more in my own country of birth, of people killing each other's children, depending on what kind of Christian they were, and sending each other's children in rhetoric to hell, and making Northern Ireland the place the most remarkable in Northern Europe for unemployment, for ignorance, for poverty, and for, I would say, stupidity too. And for them now to say, maybe we might consider breaching this gap, well, I should bloody well think so. But I don't see how. What if they'd listened to the atheist community in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and if they'd listened to the secular movement in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and I know many people who've suffered dreadfully from membership in it, not excluding being pulled out of a car by a man in a balaclava and asked, are you Catholic or Protestant? He said, I'm Jewish atheist, actually. He said, what are you, a Protestant Jewish atheist or a Catholic? You laugh. You laugh, but it's not so funny when the party of God has a gun in your ear at the same time. And that was in Britain, and still is to some extent, until recently. Rwanda. Do I say that there would be no quarrel between Hutu and Tutsi, people in Rwanda? Belgian colonialism, I think, made it worse, probably, but there are no doubt innate ethnic differences, or that felt to be in Rwanda. But the fact of the matter is, Rwanda is the most Christian country in Africa. In fact, by one account, that's to say numbers of people in relation to numbers of churches, it's the most Christian country in the world. And the Hutu power genocide, at any rate, was preached from the pulpits, actually the pulpits of the Catholic Church, as many of the people we are still looking for, wanted in that genocide, are hiding in the Vatican, along with a number of other people who should be given up to international justice, by the way. Quite a number of people. So, since Tony seems to like religious people best when they're largely non-practicing, but just basically faithful, I'll grant him that much. I say that it's not entirely the fault of religion that this happened in Rwanda, but when it's preached from the pulpit, as it was in Northern Ireland and in Rwanda, it does tend to make it very, very much worse. Thank you. You're in the right church but the wrong pew. I mean, of course I've emancipated myself from all that nonsense. I wish you would do too. I'm saying, what is the belief? And when you say it's voluntary, it's up to you, it's entirely optional. I don't think it's any more optional than Abraham saying to his son, do you want to come for a long and gloomy walk? Because God seems to be telling me to do something that had better be moral. Otherwise, it would have to be said that God had taken a perfectly normal person and asked him to commit an atrocity. Now, where else could that have come from? And millions of people every year celebrate this act of sadomasochism, as if it proved that God loved us so much that he'd make us kill our own children, and then he decides to love us so much he'll kill one of his own. You said, in a debate with Richard Dawkins, I have it down, you said the great thing about God is he knows what it's like to lose a son. Now, I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to ponder that expression for just a moment. First, it's self-evidently, if the story is true, which I don't think it is, it's self-evidently not the case, even in the narrative. He doesn't lose a son. He lends one. He doesn't offer one because no one's demanded it. There's no problem that has so far been identified in the human species that demands a human sacrifice. For what problem, for what ill is this a cure? There's no argument, there's no evidence. No, it's imposed upon you. I'm doing this because the prophets said I would. And I'm going to have the boy tortured to death in public to fulfill ancient screeds of Bronze Age Judaism. But wait, I don't want it. I don't need it. I don't feel better for it. I feel very uneasy about it. Well, that's a pity, because then you're going to be cast into eternal fire. This is no way to talk. I don't like to be addressed in that tone of voice. So I have all this I have to return a slight non-serviam, if I may be so bold, and take my chances morally. That's the more ethical thing to do. Don't want torture, don't want human sacrifice, don't want authoritarian bloodlettings, smoking temples and altars, incantations of priests and around all that. Don't want it, can't think of a single thing it will make better. The United States has uniquely a constitution that forbids the government to take sides in any religious matter, or to sponsor a church, or to adopt any form of faith itself. As a result of which, anyone who wants to practice their religion in America has to do it as a volunteer. It's what de Tocqueville wrote about so well in his Democracy in America. Ever since Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, during his tenure as president, saying, you'll be familiar with the phrase, I'm sure, rest assured, because they'd written to him out of their fear of persecution in Connecticut, rest assured that there will ever be a wall of separation between the church and the state in this country. And the maintenance of that wall, which people like me have to defend every day against those who want garbage taught in schools and pseudoscience in the name of Christ, and other atrocities. The maintenance of that wall is the guarantee of the democracy. By the way, for a bonus, can anyone tell me who the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut thought was persecuting them? The Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut. Well done. Also, that argues, by the way, for the existence of a very small but real fan base of mine somewhere in this room. Yes, now, it doesn't seem to matter very much now, but it mattered then. Give those Congregationalists enough power, as they did have in Connecticut. Just you see how unfurry they look compared to how docile they behave. Now we've disciplined them. Thank you. And if we're all made in God's image, then how come there are so many sociopaths who don't notice the existence of other people, or so many psychopaths for whom it's a positive pleasure to inflict pain? All of these are easily solved questions if you make the assumption of evolution by natural selection and consider us as an animal species. If you detect the finger of God in all this, you invent myriad problems that do not exist and cannot be solved, and that are actually a waste of our mentality. Occam's razor disposes of all the supernatural assumptions that have ever been made. We have better and more elegant explanations for everything that happens in our cosmos and in our biology now. And if we'd had these to begin with, there would never have been a foothold for the death cult of Christianity or Islam or Judaism. George Bush is someone who, as with his immediate predecessor, after various experiments in faith, ended up in his wife's church, most comfortable place for him to be. She's after all, is the one who said to him, "If you take another drink, you scumbag, I'm leaving and taking the kids," which is his way of saying he found Jesus and gave up the bottle. We know this. We know this to be true. Now, like a good Methodist, I was in Methodist school for many years myself. Like a good Methodist, George Bush says the following: "I've done all I can with this argument and with this conflict. From now on, all is in God's hands." That's quite different, I think. Would have made him a perfectly good Muslim, as a matter of fact. Combination of fatalism with a slightly sinister feeling of being chosen. Anyway. As to the center versus the fringe, I get this all the time. Don't judge religion by its fundamentalists and its extremists. No, why should I? I don't have to. I judge it by its foundational texts, and I judge it by the statements of its authorities. Take a case from the Quran, just for once. Actually, it's not the Quran, excuse me. Take a case from the Muslim foundational documents, the Hadith, which have equal canonical authority. They say, if someone becomes an apostate, leaves or changes their religion, they must be killed. The sentence is death. Don't anyone be telling me that's a metaphor. No, it's just intended as a sort of general admonition. No, it means what it says, and it's been applied to a couple of people who now have to live, friends of mine, as a matter of fact, as political refugees in Washington, D.C., who know how true the impact of that hadith. There's no wiggle room there, so the question for a Muslim must be asked. Do you think this is the word of God, or don't you? Because if you don't, you're saying that God shouldn't be able to tell you to do an evil thing, and if you do, you're saying he should. In either case, faith falls as a reinforcement of ordinary morality. Recently, Dr. McGrath is a member of the Church of England, the Anglican Communion, the Episcopalian Communion, but what George Herbert, my favorite religious poet after John Donne, the sweet mediocrity of our native church was how he referred to the See of Canterbury. Everyone thinks it's the mildest of all. It not only calls itself a flock, it looks very sheep-like. However, the Bishop of Carlisle recently, tipped, I'm told, to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury, said that the floods in northern Yorkshire that devastated a large part of England in the summer and killed and dispossessed a large number of people were punishment for homosexuality. Now, to connect meteorology to morality seems to me, I have to say, flat out idiotic, whichever way you do it. If there was a connection between meteorology and morality, which religion has very often argued that there is, I don't see why the floods hit northern Yorkshire. I can think of some parts of London where they would have done a lot more good. Just as the hurricane that devastated New Orleans, we found punishment for sin, as it must have been, left the French Quarter alone. You have to make up your mind on this. You either think God intervenes or he doesn't. I'm clear. I say, I don't think so. Will Dr. McGrath say that he does intervene and that we can tell when he does, or will he not say so? You have to ask him. You have to hear his answer. Does he say sometimes intervenes? Or does he say he moves in mysterious ways? My position is clear. His remains, I think, distinctly opaque. It was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, who said the following, that a nuclear war, thermonuclear war, would only hasten our transition into a more blessed state into which we would bound to eventuate anyway. If I had told you that remark and asked you to guess, you would have said Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said it, or some other fanatical verminous mullah. No, the Archbishop of Canterbury said it, and why shouldn't he? Because another immoral and sinister thing about religion is that lurking under it at all times, in every one of its versions, is a desire for this life to come to an end, for this poor world to be over. The yearning, the secret death wish that's in all of it, let this be gone, let us move to the next stage, is present at all times, unless it's repudiated, which I invite Dr. McGrath to do. But if he does so, I don't see in what eschatological sense he can claim to remain a Christian. And he can't take it a la carte. If you claim or accept the one version, you have to accept the other. If it's true in general that religion does one thing and some people do good from it, then you have to accept all the wicked acts that are attributable to it as well. And I think you'll find that those don't quite equalize at the margin, depressing though that conclusion would be. I have a challenge, which I have now put in print on the Christianity Today website, in the Holy Blossom Synagogue in Toronto the night before last, in many other places, and on the air and on the web, and it's this. If it's to be argued that our morality, our ethics can be derived from the supernatural, then name me an action, a moral action, taken by a believer, or a moral statement uttered by one, that could not have been made or uttered by an infidel, an unbeliever. I have tried this everywhere. On a large number of people, I've not yet had even one reply. But if I was to ask you, can you think of a wicked action that could only have been performed by someone who believed they were on an errand from God, there isn't one of you who would take 10 seconds to think of an example. And what does that tell us? I would say it tells us a lot. And here's the bogus answer to it, that was only very gently mentioned by Dr. McGrath this evening. Well, what about atheist nihilism? What about atheist cruelty? What about 20th century totalitarianism? I take this seriously enough to have put a chapter in my book about it, available, by the way, at fine bookstores everywhere. And I can only summarize it now, and I'll do so very as tersely as I can. First, fascism, the original 20th century totalitarian movement, is really, historically, another name for the political activity of the Catholic right wing. There is no other name for it. Francoism, Salazarism, what happened in Croatia, in Austria, in Bavaria, and so on. The church keeps on trying to apologize for it, can't apologize for it enough. It's the Catholic right, Mussolini. You can't quite say that about Hitler, National Socialism, because that's also based on Nordic and pagan blood myths, leader worship, and so on, though Hitler never repudiated his membership of the church. And prayers were said for him on his birthday every year till the very end, on the orders of the Vatican. And all of these facts are well known, and the church still hasn't found another way to apologize for that enough. And whatever it is you can call that, you can't call it secular. You may not call it secular. By the way, Joseph Goebbels was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. 50%, according to Paul Johnson, the Catholic historian, of the Waffen-SS were confessing Catholics. None of them was ever threatened with excommunication, even threatened with it for taking part in the final solution. But Joseph Goebbels was excommunicated for marrying a Protestant. You see, we do have our standards. Now, okay, moving to Marxism, moving to Leninism. Okay, in Russia in 1917, for hundreds of years, millions of people have been told the head of the state is a supernatural power. The Tsar is not just the head of the government, not just a king, but he stands between heaven and earth. And this has been inculcated in generations of Russians for hundreds of years. If you're Joseph Stalin, himself a seminarian from Georgia, you shouldn't be in the totalitarianism business if you can't exploit a ready-made reservoir of credulity and servility that's as big as that. It's just waiting for you to capitalize on. So what do? Well, we'll have an inquisition for one thing. We'll have miracles for another. Lysenko's biology will produce 4 harvests a year. We'll have heresy hunts. We'll tell everyone they must be grateful only to the leader for what they get, and they must thank him and praise him all the time. And that they must be aware all the time of the existence of the counter-revolutionary devil who waits to... You see where I'm going with this? That's not secularism.
Visitor goes to the Western Wall, sees a man tearing at his beard, banging his head on the wall, shoving messages into it at the rate of knots, wailing and flailing, watches with fascination. When the guy finally breaks off, he says, "Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing you were being unusually devout in your addresses to the wall, to the divine. Do you mind if I asked you, what you were praying for. He said, I was praying that there should be peace, that there should be mutual love and respect between all the peoples in this area. And said, and what do you think, says the visitor. Says, well, it's like talking to the wall.
What Dr. McGrath just said, I thought was unusually good on this point. You'll recall what he said on the Dostoevskian matter. If God exists, we have to do what he says. If he doesn't, we can do what we like. Now, just apply this for a second in practice and in theory. Is it not said of God's chosen people, and is it not said to them by God in the Pentateuch that they can do exactly as they like to other people? They can enslave them, they can take their land, they can take their women, they can destroy all their young men, they can help themselves to all their virgins, they can do what anyone who had no sense of anything but their own rights would be able to do, but in this case with divine permission. Doesn't that make it somewhat more evil? In Iran, where I've been to all three axes of evil countries, by the way, I think I'm the only writer who can say that. You're not allowed to sentence a woman who is a virgin to death, even though she may have committed, in the eyes of the mullahs, a capital crime, perhaps by showing her hair too often or her limbs. She can't be sentenced to death. But religious law means she can be raped by the Revolutionary Guards and she's not a virgin anymore. And then they can kill her. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law used to be considered the motto of Satanism, as I recall. Divine permission given to people who think they have God on their side enables actions that a normal, morally normal unbeliever would not contemplate. The mutilation of genitalia of children. Who would do that if it wasn't decided that God wanted it? Just as when the poet in England gets the poet laureateship, they start to write drivel instead of poetry for some reason. It's the king's scrofula the other way around. Morally normal and intelligent people find themselves saying fatuously wicked things when this subject comes up. The suicide bombing community is entirely faith-based. The genital mutilation community is entirely faith-based. Slavery is mandated by the Bible. You keep hearing how many abolitionists were Christians. Well, it was about time that they took a stand against it, having mandated it for so long. So it's not even a tautology, I think, to say that there's a relationship between the human impulse to do evil, to be selfish, to be self-centered, to be greedy, and a contrast between that and faith, because given only faith, mountains can be moved, and millions of people who would never normally acquiesce in evil are brought to it straight away and with ease, and with self-righteousness. There, that's my answer to that. And the questioner did not answer my challenge. Name an ethical statement made or action performed by a believer in the name of faith that couldn't have been by an infidel, and name, if you can, this is easier, a wicked action that could only be mandated by faith, and then you'll see how silly your question was, wherever you were.
Well, let me ask it then. Christopher, did you heard Professor McGrath also, though, condemn any form of religious violence?
Well, that's easy to do. I mean, I could say, look, an atheist can be a nihilist.
No, I think there's a room for agreement here between the two of you.
I'm not looking for consensus, baby. I'm just not in the mood. I'm not in the vein, as King Richard says.
Yeah.
Not in the vein. No. I'm glad he condemns religious violence. Does he condemn the promise of other people's territory to the chosen people, for example? Does Jesus say, or does he not say, I come to bring not peace but a sword? He does say that. Should I take it literally or metaphorically? Right? Yeah. Is genital mutilation of small boys mandated by Jews, and is it often mandated by Muslims, or not? Is there a paradise to which people can hope to get by dying for their faith, or isn't there? Has holy war been proclaimed by both the Pope and by the mullahs, or not? These are problems not for me. For me, it's simple. We're primates. This is what we would expect to happen if there was no God.
Let me
it was what we would expect to see if faith was pointless. But it's an endless mystery where none exists if you think there's an intervening finger from on high. Then it becomes mysterious.
Well, there are people who think talking to walls is actually a form of divine worship in this book. And it's another instance, and not that I didn't bring it up laboriously myself, but I don't mind it again, of the difference between Tony and myself when he says, he uses his giveaway phrase, in the name of religion, rather than as a direct consequence of scriptural authority, which is what I mean when I talk about this. No one's going to deny, are they? No one is going to deny there are awards of real estate made in the Bible by none other than Jehovah himself. That land is promised to human primates over other human primates in response to a divine covenant. Do excuse me. Sorry, this sometimes happens. No, that can't be denied. When David Ben-Gurion was prime minister of what he still called a secular state, he called in Yigal Yadin and Finkelstein and the other Israeli archaeologists, professional guys, and said, go out into the desert and dig up the title deeds to our state. You'll find our legitimate. That was the instruction to the Department of Archaeology. They went, after they conquered Sinai and West Bank, they went even further afield, looking for some evidence Moses had ever been there. They didn't find any because there never has been and there never will be any. But you cannot say that the foundational cause, casus belli in this region, the idea that God intervenes in real estate and territorial disputes, isn't inscribed in the text itself. And not only in the Jewish text, but thanks to a foolish decision taken in the early Christian centuries, where it was decided not to dump the New Testament, but and to start again just with the Nazarene story. Great Christian theologians like Marcion were in favor of doing that. Why do we want to bring the darkness and tyranny and terror and death and blood and cultism of the first books along with us? Surely we should start again. No, we're saddling ourselves with all that. So this is a responsibility for the Christian world too. And need I add that there is no good Muslim who does not say that Allah tells us we can never give up an inch of Muslim land, and that once our mosques are built, there can be no retreat. It would be a betrayal. It would lead you straight to hell. In other words, yes, they gibber and jabber, all of them, the three religions. Yeah, you're quite right. God awards land. It's just you've got the wrong title. No. This is what I mean when I say that religion is a real danger to the survival of civilization, and that it makes this banal regional, national dispute, which if reduced to its real proportions is a nothingness, if it makes that not just lethally insoluble, but is drawing in other contending parties who really openly wish, for an apocalyptic conclusion to it, as also bodied forth in the same scriptural texts. In other words, that it will be the death of us all, the end of humanity, the end of the world, the end of the whole suffering veil of tears, which is what they secretly want. This is a failure of the parties of God, and it's not something that happens because people misinterpret the texts. It's because they believe in them. That's the problem. Thank you.
But what do you
like someone once accused me of trying to assassinate his character, and I said, no, your character committed suicide a long time ago. They've done the dehumanizing work for us, thanks, and they are fellow primates. Of course, there's no question of redefining them as another species, but there is a very important question of whether we intend to assert our own values as superior to theirs and as worth defending against them. And Christianity, with the sickly relativism that you've stressed so often this evening, disarms us for this very important struggle. That's why the Archbishop of Canterbury is this week groveling at the feet of the mullahs in Iran, and saying we should leave them alone and must try not to hurt their feelings, as he groveled at the feet of Saddam Hussein, as actually every Christian church has been doing in the recent past, saying, well, you know, faith is better than no faith. Any faith is better than none. They all agreed to condemn Salman Rushdie for blasphemy rather than the people who tried to kill him for money, for writing a novel, for example. They all condemned the Danish cartoons because blasphemy against any faith is an offense to all.
Could I interrupt you here on this?
Okay, well, this is very serious, ladies and gentlemen, because this stuff could kill you.
Consider yourselves, and consider this carefully, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, comrades, friends. Are you yourselves willing, for the sake of certain elements of the numinous, perhaps for a great record of good works, as is proposed by Tony, are you willing to say that you give your allegiance to an ultimate Redeemer? Because you're not really religious if you don't believe that there is a divine supervision involved. You don't have to believe it intervenes all the time. If you don't believe that, you're already halfway out the door. You don't need me. But are you willing to pay the price of a permanent supervisor? Are you willing to pay the price of believing in things that are supernatural? Miracles, afterlives, angels. Are you willing to admit, perhaps this most of all, are you willing to admit that human beings can be the interpreter of this divine figure? Because a religion means that you will have to follow someone who is your religious leader. You can't, try as you may, follow Jesus of Nazareth. It can't be done. You can try and do it, it can't be done. You'll have to follow his vicar on earth, Pope Benedict XXVI, as presently, his own claim, not mine. The apostolic succession, the vicar of Christ on earth. You have to say, this person has divine authority. I maintain that that and what goes with it is too much of a sacrifice of the mental and intellectual freedom that is essential to us to be tolerated. And you gain everything by repudiating that and standing up to your own full height. And you gain much more than you will by pretending that you're a member of a flock or in any other way, any kind of sheep. Thank you.
The likelihood that what Edwin Hubble saw through that telescope, the red light escaping at speeds that none of us here are capable of really imagining, towards the ultimate expansion and collapse of the universe and the heat death of the whole thing, that all that happened so we could be sitting here is, to me, in the very, very highest degree, improbable. That a process of evolution by natural selection just on our own tiny little planet, which in its own tiny little solar system is the only one on which life can be supported. Everywhere else, just in our little system, all the other rocks are either much too hot or much too cold to support life, as is much of our planet, which we know has for a long time been, not recently either, on a climatic knife edge, and which is still cooling. Only one. And on this planet, 99.8% of every species that ever evolved died out. This is an extraordinary way, I think, to make sure that Homo sapiens comes to Georgetown. It is only the most extraordinarily self-centered species could imagine that all this was going on for our sake. That's why I don't like people saying that their religious faith is modest or humble. It's the reverse. It's unbelievably solipsistic. And that's why you get people apparently abject, much too abject for my taste, like Mother Teresa. Oh, I'm so humble I can hardly bother to feed myself, But out of my way because I'm on a mission for God. No. This is arrogance, as a matter of fact, and it claims to know what it cannot know. I could say that Einstein was right when he said, the miracle is, of the natural order, the miracle is there are no miracles. Understand this paradox. The natural order doesn't interrupt itself. The sun doesn't stand still at midday. God doesn't catch a child as the kid falls out of a window, or heal lepers randomly. And none of that ever happens. The miracle is there's a force that holds it all together that's consistent and unvarying. That's wonderful. Okay, he may show there's a mind somewhere in the universe. But to say we know what that mind is, to move from the deist position to the theist one, we know what God wants us to eat or not eat. We know in what positions he wants us to make love or with whom. We know his instructions on it, is an unbelievable piece of conceit. And in my opinion, it's the reason why I may be a very poor spokesman for my side of this argument, but I think anyone who thinks about it has to vote that given the amount of uncertainty that we have, and given how much we now know, how much more we know about how little we know, the definition of education and our civilization, the only people who have to lose in this argument are those who say they do know, and who claim, yes, I do know what God wants, I do think he sent a son, I do think there was a resurrection, I do think there's salvation, claiming to know things they cannot conceivably know. I mean, to put it in a mild way, if Dr. McGrath has such extraordinary sources of information as the ones he's claimed to have available to him, I can't understand why he's only occupying a chair at Oxford University.
Well,
you should be, with the knowledge you've got, you should be a real mensch. And I'm afraid you don't know any more than I do about whether there was ever a Jesus of Nazareth, a resurrection, a miracle, a virgin birth, or anything. You couldn't know any more than I do. You can't. You just claim that you do. I'm afraid that means, I think, that you lose this round.
Well, if I could respond.